The Commanders' efforts to ramp up protection for Jayden Daniels gets an A as we start grading some offseason moves. That and more right now on Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Commanders. I'm Dave Harrison, your guy on the ground covering the Washington Commanders. And not only am I here with you on Locked On Commanders, but I'm also covering the Washington Commanders for WUSA9.com, locally, as well as Sports Illustrated's CommanderGameDay.com. I want to thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen or view today, whether you're an everydayer or you're just coming through. I appreciate you. To those everydayers, though, who come through every single episode, a special thank you goes out to you. And if you haven't already, please subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you are listening to today's episode. If this is your first time through Locked On Commanders, I appreciate you finding the show. Hopefully you like what you hear or you see, and you come back for more very, very soon. Coming up on today's episode, stability in the coaching staff is an action worth praising. The receiver group in Washington got a bump, but the efforts to build a wall in front of Jayden Daniels is where we're going to start things off as we start to grade some of the offseason moves made here in 2025. On today's episode of Locked On Commanders, a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Starting with the trade for left tackle Laremy Tunsil, the Commanders' efforts to improve the offensive line is getting an A from me. That's right, it's getting an A. Now, again, as we've talked about before, right, the proof is obviously going to be in the production and the way that this offensive line comes together, the way they're actually able to protect Jayden Daniels and do all of those things. When I look at one off season and how much can a team really go out there and do and all these other things, I think the Washington Commanders have done just about what we could ask them to do realistically to improve their play up front, right? In the regular season last year, the Washington Commanders gave up 155 total pressures. Now that tied for 17th in the National Football League, but they gave up the 9th fewest sacks, right? So what that clearly demonstrates and that clearly tells us is Jayden Daniels did a lot of sack avoidance work on his own, right? The offensive line certainly held their own in certain moments and certainly had some good stretches and good games and all that stuff. Don't want to take that away from them, right? But there were a lot more pressures than there were sacks because Jayden Daniels was able to use his athleticism, and credit to the coaching staff as well. Dan Quinn, Coach Cliff Kingsbury, the offensive coordinator, neither of them tried to contain Jayden Daniels and make him work more from the pocket than he was comfortable with. They allowed him to kind of get comfortable as the game came to him, and eventually you saw him work more from the pocket and things like that. But especially early on, especially when you go back to that Tampa Bay Buccaneers game, first game of the regular season, first game of his career, a lot of running because that's what he's going to be comfortable doing. Now in the postseason, 2024, Washington gave up the most pressures, 41 of them total, more than any other team in the playoffs. Now, of course, granted, saw with that, right? Some of those teams in the playoffs only played one game, right? Like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers that we just talked about. But one or out of the four teams that played championship game weekend, right? So, the two teams that played in the AFC championship game, the two teams that played in the NFC championship game, out of those four teams, the Commanders still outpaced all of those four teams, including both of the teams that played in the Super Bowl, the Chiefs and the Eagles. Even though they played a full game more than the Washington Commanders, still had fewer pressures given up than the Washington Commanders offensive line. And it wasn't necessarily even close. Again, Sam Cosmi did go out in the postseason in that Detroit Lions win. However, bottom line is Washington Commanders offensive line giving up a lot of pressure in 2024. So that's something that the team came into the 2025 offseason really wanting to kind of address because, again, in the postseason, Jayden Daniels only sacked twice. Actually, the fewest amount of sacks on any quarterback in the playoffs all of last year. But as much as you love the fact that Jayden can make those plays, you don't want to make it a requisite, a requirement, I should say, that he has to make those plays, right? You love that he can, but you obviously want him to be able to not have to make those plays as much as possible. So that's where the Laremy Tunsil trade comes in, right? Statement of intent is really how the way that I look at that is that's their statement this offseason that, look, we're going out here to give Jayden Daniels an offensive line that can protect him better than the one that he had last year. And I think given the data that we just discussed, it was a very fair approach for the Washington Commanders to take. So in that trade, just to remind everybody, Washington obviously gets Laremy Tunsil, 5-time Pro Bowl left tackle. They also got a 2025 fourth-round pick from the Houston Texans that turned into wide receiver Jalen Lane. In return, Houston got a third-round pick in 2025 that turned into wide receiver Jalen Knoll out of Iowa State. and a 7th round pick, which they traded to the Jacksonville Jaguars, and all kinds of other stuff happened. They also Houston does a 2026 2nd and 4th round pick. So in the next NFL draft, the Washington Commanders will have to pay up with that draft capital. So a good amount of draft capital, certainly given up for Laramie Tunsil there. But again, when you look at the numbers, you look at the data, and you look at this and you say, even given what Jayden Daniels was able to do, even without a guy like Laramie Tunsil, if Laramie Tunsil can come in and increase, their offensive line efficiency by, even 20%, he's 20% of the offensive line, right? So if he can improve that by 20%, that's a lot less pressure that Jayden Daniels is going to see in 2025. And again, we look at Jayden Daniels taking the next step. Well, protecting him will help him take that next step as a passer. But of course, Commanders offensive line not done being reworked with that trade. Josh Connerly Jr. drafted in the 1st round of this year's NFL draft. His upside versus his rookie risk. I think you look at the upside and you kind of see where the Commanders going here. Athletic background, right? He was a running back, tight end, D end at one point in his football career, not at Oregon necessarily, right? But late high school career. Was a basketball player, lettered in basketball in high school. Eligible receiver potentially right down the line. He does have a touchdown reception at Oregon. Had a touchdown reception in his 2022 collegiate season. So certainly could see, Josh Connerly Jr. join the ranks of Trent Scott as offensive lineman to catch touchdown passes from Jayden Daniels. And he came into college ranked ahead of Will Campbell, ahead of Kelvin Banks Jr., 2 O-linemen that were really highly regarded in the draft process. He was ranked higher than them coming out of high school. Did go to Oregon, was voted the top offensive lineman by the national team squad at the Reese's Senior Bowl this year, despite the very, very popular viral clip of him getting beat on one practice rep there. Quickness and ability, to his ability to move are his strengths. Those are his calling cards. Those are things you're going to see the most. Strength and lack of experience on the right side. Hasn't played right side in big time football, so that's a concern. Strength is a little bit of concern. I highlighted some hand placement issues and some hand placement, I should say concerns, not issues, right? They're only issues if they're a problem, but some hand placement concerns that I have from watching his tape. Pointed that out to insiders in the tape study earlier this offseason. So, he's a rookie. He's a first-year NFL player. There are things you like. There are things that obviously there's going to have to work on, and the team is obviously going to be busy doing that. Brandon Coleman also moving inside, part of this reshuffle. So he goes from being the left tackle last year inside right now, looking at he's going to be the left guard. I think that's probably where he's going to end up staying. His move inside is great. Strength and anchor is big inside. That was his strength last year at left tackle, is his anchor. His speed was a little bit deficient, so they moved that strength inside. Him and Sam Cosmi. Once Sam Cosmi is healthy, man, Brandon Coleman on the left, Sam Cosmi on the right, that could be a great interior offensive line duo shaped around center Tyler Biotish for years to come if it works out. Athletic guard play from both sides of the line. I mean, what else do you want, right? A deeper talent pool, however, is also coming. So whenever Josh Connerly takes over full-time at right tackle, right, obviously that's going to be the plan. That's going to be the intent. Whenever that happens, then Andrew Wiley is going to move to the bench. So that automatically makes your depth a little bit better, because if Andrew Wiley is depth, then that's a starter from last year, Super Bowl experience, all that stuff as a backup. You love that swing tackle, right? Trent Scott has inside-outside experience. Obviously, he's the guy who stepped up when Andrew Wiley got injured last year, so you love to hear that. Nate Herbig coming over from Pittsburgh Steelers experience, New York Jets experience. Do expect him to become the backup center. He's got some center experience as well. So you think basically look at those three as kind of your main backup players: Andrew Wiley, Trent Scott, Nate Herbig. And then when Sam Cosmi comes back, most likely Nick Allegretti is also moving in. So, I mean, you've got 4 guys right there that all have starter experience, or have at least at one point in time threatened to be a starter, challenged to be a starter. That's pretty good depth on the offensive line in front of Jayden Daniels. So we'll see how it all pans out, obviously. But I like what the Washington Commanders did this offseason to upgrade their starting lineup, but also upgrade the depth in a lot of ways by upgrading their starting lineup. This offensive line looks like it's going to be ready to protect Jayden Daniels. Again, we'll see how that really comes together, but whether he has the right weapons to take advantage of his protection, that is a question that we need to address coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you by Monarch Money. When you're reshaping an offensive line or tracking roster depth, the details matter. And when it comes to your finances, they matter even more. Monarch Money makes it easier to see where your money is going, set goals, and actually stay on top of them. It's not just about budgeting. It's a full financial command center. I'll be honest, once I saw how much I was spending on takeout each month, it really shifted how I planned things. And that clarity made a real difference day to day. But Monarch Money is more than just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center where you can track all of your accounts, your investments, and your spending all in one place. So in addition to managing your money, it's also going to set you up to build real wealth. One thing that was surprising to me was how much I was spending on those subscriptions, but also on some delivery fees. So I've had to cut back a little bit on those to manage my income just a little bit better. So take control of your finances like I did with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. The Washington Commanders receiver group looks improved, but it still lacks a little bit of that top-end firepower that puts real fear into elite defenses. And of course, we're not talking about Terry McLaurin here. Terry McLaurin, as a wide receiver one, very good player, very solid player. You love having him. Scary Terry for a reason. There's going to be an element of fear there. The question coming into this season is going to be whether or not adding Deebo, drafting Jalen Lane in the 4th round is going to be enough to really threaten opposing defense, right? On paper, it looks really good. And off of what we've seen in OTAs, in mandatory minicamp, I think I'm pretty confident that Deebo is going to be much more like the good version of Deebo that San Francisco saw versus the less than good version of Deebo Samuel that they saw. I'm not concerned about his weight. I'm not concerned about his physique. I know that people continue to still talk about Terrell Owens, running his mouth about it. I mean, it's, T.O.'s going to T.O., right? Cleveland Browns going to Cleveland Browns. T.O.'s going to T.O. It is what it is. But I'm just telling you from putting my own 2 eyes on Deebo, multiple practices, I don't have any concerns about that whatsoever. The question is, how much better can Deebo Samuel really be compared to the last time we saw Deebo Samuel? Can he stay healthy? All of these things that are not things that I can answer for you right here in the beginning of July. But from a scheme fit, he looks like a screen demon. Deep ball, I think, is still going to be there. I don't think it's going to be a premier part of the connection between Jayden and Deebo, but I do think you're going to have opportunities here and there. Maybe you run a switch or a cross or something like that, and you're able to hit Deebo a little bit deeper downfield and let him do his thing. But like Jayden Daniels said, he's really looking forward to hitting him with a 1 or 2 yard pass, maybe even 1 or 2 yards behind the line of scrimmage, and then letting Deebo take it 80 yards for a touchdown, getting all them stats and them fantasy points on Deebo's legs. I'm looking forward to seeing it as well. You should too. So I think that Deebo Samuel is going to be a very good addition to the group. I just don't think it's necessarily going to put the Commanders in A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith territory, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins territory, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin territory, right? I don't think it's going to be that type of a threatening duo. So for that, I give this offseason for the receiver room a B. Right now, that's not to say that, they should have gone out there and traded for George Pickens or go out there and trade for DK Metcalf, things like that. Like Adam Peters is going to manage the roster the way that Adam Peters is going to manage the roster. But if you're asking me where, if the goal is making this wide receiver room the most threatening in the National Football League, how do they achieve that? I think it's a B. So you have the deep threats with guys like Terry McLaurin, Noah Brown. We didn't see a lot of it last year outside the Hail Mary, right? But he does have some deep ball ability. Again, I think Deebo's got more, but you just don't have that kind of obvious in-your-face, upfront, deep ball threatener outside of Terry. Now, that's where maybe a guy like Jalen Lane can come in, even though Virginia Tech didn't really use him deep as much either, at least not as much as you expect with a guy with his type of speed. He certainly was more of a quick slant, quick hitch, screen type of guy, just like Deebo is, just not the running back build that Deebo kind of has. So we'll have to see how that kind of develops as well. So it'll be really interesting to see how Cliff Kingsbury puts all these pieces together. So I like what they've done, I should say, in the receiver room, but I'm not, so hyped up to the point where I'm going to say like it's an A, right? And if you can go get the raw talent of George Pickens without some of the other off the field or even on the field issues of George Pickens, then maybe it would be an A. If they would have traded for DK Metcalf, probably looking at an A, things like that. But I still like what they've done, just not going to go up to an A because there's got to be room for even higher growth. Now, hopefully at the end of the season, we can look back on this and say, no, that was an A. And Deebo is, I don't know if he's going to get a new deal, depending on how much money he would want. But at worst case scenario, he's going to go out there and be a free agent, and the Commanders will get a comp pick for him in 2027. Best case scenario, he gets re-signed, does well, and we've got Terry McLaurin, Deebo Samuel, Luke McCaffrey for a while longer. Speaking of Luke McCaffrey, he's the guy who's obviously shown the most growth so far this portion of the offseason through OTAs, through the mandatory minicamp. Dude looks faster. He looks quicker. He's getting open easier. He's making catches, scoring multiple touchdowns in these 11-on-11s. And I know they don't count, but last year, we weren't exactly seeing Luke light up the scoreboard in practice either. So, that's a promising sign either way. So Luke McCaffrey's updated development and continuing growth into training camp, certainly going to be something to watch. He's been seen working out with Christian, his brother, Christian McCaffrey out there, and some other really great talented guys. Michael Gallup is an interesting character because, he's someone that, some people really had high expectations for when he was signed. I kind of took the, wait and see approach to it. I really liked him when he played at Dallas. When he became a free agency, I was covering the Buccaneers. So I was making a case for the Buccaneers to go out there and sign him. He ends up going to the Las Vegas Raiders. He ended up not playing for the Las Vegas Raiders, but he did sign with the Las Vegas Raiders, retired, ends up coming out of retirement. Didn't see him in the mandatory minicamp because he got injured. So that injury risk is real. And, I don't know what the status of his injury is. I don't know what the future holds for him, but I know some people had some really high hopes for him. If he's not going to be able to go, then, that's going to be something to watch, as is Noah Brown. Was looking really good at OTAs, looking really good at the mandatory minicamp. No official diagnosis on his injury. I know that, some people were looking at signs like, he went to this autograph signing, he held this camp and all this other stuff. So he must be good to go. I'm not going to put any carts before any horses. Hopefully that's true. But until we get told, officially from the team, I'm not going to go out here and make any assumptions on Noah Brown's future. Hopefully, again, it's good news, and hopefully he's able to come through. Jaylen Lane, super excited for him from a special teams perspective, especially how much he's going to develop as a receiver in his rookie year and how much he's going to be able to get involved. Still to be determined. And of course, if Michael Gallup can't go, that opens up the door for other guys, KJ Osborne, some of these other undrafted free agents. But don't forget Terry McLaurin's contract shadow, right? That's kind of out there as well. Like, we have to get this contract situation figured out. I was on the radio with Lake Lewis Jr. on Tuesday afternoon talking about this with him extensively. And, as far as expectations, $32.5 million, I think, is the floor for Terry McLaurin's next contract extension. I think 36.5 is probably the ceiling for that contract extension. We'll see where it goes. I know some people want him to take like 28 million, 30 million, stuff like that. Would love to see Terry, very beginning of training camp. Would have loved to see him in mandatory minicamp, of course, but really just want him to be there at the beginning of training camps. Whether that deal gets done the day before training camp opens, the day of training camp opening, whatever it is, let's get the deal done, get Terry out there, because Jayden and Zach Ertz, Jayden and Noah Brown, Jayden and Luke McCaffrey, all of these year two connections looked either just as good in the term of Jayden Daniels and Zach Ertz. I mean, really couldn't look much better, right, than it did last year. So looked just as good during OTA's mandatory minicamp. His connection with Noah Brown looked better. Connection with Luke McCaffrey looked better. So unless Terry McLaurin is going to be the standout who looks worse with Jayden Daniels in year two, I can't wait to see what these two look like when they get on the field together. From the draft perspective, would have liked a higher pick dedicated to a receiver like, Jalen Knoll out of Iowa State, right? He was one of our favorites in our study, but that was a third rounder. The Commanders didn't have that third rounder because of the trade. Would you rather have Jalen Knoll and not have Laramie Tunsil, or would you rather have Jaylen Lane and have Laramie Tunsil? I'd rather have Jaylen Lane and have Laramie Tunsil. So I think we're good. We should be good with the way it comes out, but it does lower that grade again a little bit to a B. So the weaponry isn't necessarily top shelf. So a little bit is going to be on Jayden to continue to find good plays, extend, and all those things. But it's also going to be on Cliff Kingsbury, right? And how he designs this up and draws this up and forces defenses to shift where they don't want to shift and take eyes to where they don't want to take eyes. So we'll see, how he can turn this unit into an elite unit, despite the quote unquote on paper product not being super elite right now. If the Commanders offense is going to take their next step, it'll be because the same voices are finally getting a second year to build on what they started. That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Coaching continuity and vision is getting an A because retaining the full coaching staff is going to give Jayden Daniels the rarest gift ever in Washington: stability. When the coaching search was on for the Washington Commanders, so many people went out there and said, you got to hire an offensive head coach. You have to hire an offensive head coach because you're going to draft a quarterback at number 2 overall. And the worst thing you can do for your quarterback is hire a defensive-minded head coach and then have your offensive coordinator stolen after year 1 or fired after year 1. And to a certain extent, I agree. But I think that the way you attack that is, if you're a defensive-minded head coach, you hire an offensive coordinator and you hire an offensive staff to where you can groom from inside. I think Dan Quinn has done a very good job of doing that with guys like Anthony Lynn, with guys like Brian Johnson, Tavita Pritchard, even David Blau waiting in the wings, maybe like 2 or 3 promotions away, right? Like you've got guys in this coaching staff that aren't necessarily Cliff Kingsbury guys. Like some of them, if he gets a head coaching job, might go with him, sure, right? But you're not in a situation where you look like your cupboards are necessarily going to be stripped bare. And, there's only so much you can do, right? You can't hire 30 coaches on the offensive staff alone just to make sure you've got somebody. But the good news this year is whether it's because of the success, whether it's because of Jayden Daniels and belief in him, whether it's because of Dan Quinn and his leadership and what he means to everybody, the coaching staff intact, coming back. It's such a rarity, especially for a team that did as well as it did. And look, I mean, it wasn't without trying. Like Cliff Kingsbury had offers to interview for head coaching jobs. I know the Bears and the Saints were like the 2 primary ones that everybody was talking about. Joey Jr. got a head coaching interview. Tavita Pritchard got opportunities to interview. David Blau was invited to interviews. Larry Izzo was rumored to be heading to New England to go join Mike Vrabel. Anthony Lynn had an interview request. Like this coaching staff was definitely looked at. Assistant GM Lance Newmark got a request to interview. And look, if this team does really well this year, they're going to get combed through again, right? They're going to get interviews again, and guys are going to come back. And I think if this team wins 10 to 12 games in the regular season again, makes noise in the postseason again, I think they're probably going to lose a couple of coaches. I think Cliff Kingsbury might be one of those coaches, to be quite honest with you. But, the key is having those succession plans in place and having the ability to say, look, like, maybe if it's, and I'm just spitballing here, don't take this as, gospel. I'm just spitballing. Like maybe if Brian Johnson is the succession plan for Cliff Kingsbury, like, hey, if Cliff Kingsbury gets a head coaching job, Brian Johnson, you know what I mean? You're going to be our next offensive coordinator. So, hey, Brian, you get a job interview. Let us have a moment. Let's see what happens with Cliff, and maybe we'll promote you internally, right? Those types of things. So, we'll see what happens. But I think that right now, you just love the fact that all of these guys, to a man, right? You talk to all of them. We talked to David Blau during the OTA period and just talk about what it means to come back and why you're so happy to come back and things like that. And just everybody talks about the culture, the leadership, Dan Quinn, what they're building, the guys in the locker room, right? It's a very cohesive unit. And I think that even though there's no move, right? We're talking about grading off-season moves here today. There's no move made. Like they didn't, there are some people added to the roster as well, but they didn't go out here and, re-sign Cliff Kingsbury, re-sign Joe Wood Jr. Like you kept all your guys. It's enough of a non-move that it's also a significant thing that we need to talk about. So I'm going to add it here on this episode. So just great stuff going on in the culture, great stuff going on in the locker room, in the coaching staff. And I think that it's all got everybody set up for a very, very interesting, very fun and exciting 2025 campaign coming up. That's going to do it for today's episode. We are in July. So this month, training camp is going to begin. It's coming up sooner than you think. Next time on Locked On Commanders, we're going to continue our offseason move grading, assessing whether smart depth moves and culture-driven decisions can sustain momentum and elevate an already rising contender in Washington. In the meantime, if you've got questions or comments, we've got another mailbag episode coming up around the corner as well. You can text them directly to me by becoming a Locked On Commanders insider at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Scouting podcast as teams overhaul their offensive lines, retool their receiving rooms. Host Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino break down how these roster construction decisions impact every NFL team. Find Locked On NFL Scouting on YouTube or wherever you're listening to this podcast right now. And thank you, as always, for making Locked On Commanders your first listen or view today and every day. Everydayers, I see you, I appreciate you, and I thank you. Until next time, stay safe, be kind to one another. We'll talk again soon right here on Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.